Hello, this is Dr. K. In this video, we're going to talk about the Simple Affable Bean project. We'll talk about what it is, where it comes from, and why it's important. The Simple Affable Bean project consists of both a web application and a website that explains how that application is implemented. Together, they illustrate how to develop an e-commerce website using Java technology. Simple Affable Bean is a rewrite of the code for Affable Bean, a simple web application used in the NetBeans e-commerce tutorial. As the name implies, the NetBeans e-commerce tutorial takes you through the development of an e-commerce website using the NetBeans IDE. But the techniques and principles discussed are relevant to Java web development in general. You don't need to go through the NetBeans e-commerce tutorial to understand the Simple Affable Bean project, but it is an excellent and well-written tutorial, and I can personally recommend it, especially because the tutorial is divided into 13 sections, and it's written in such a way that you can focus on the section you want without having to go back and revisit previous sections. The main reason that Simple Affable Bean project was written is because its creator, Dr. Atkinson, wanted to update the original Affable Bean so that it was more in line with best practices that he saw being used in industry. He called the result Simple Affable Bean and was careful to keep the interface of the original application and the functionality the same. So, for the most part, the two applications differ only in their implementations. The Affable Bean is a fictional grocery store in Prague, Czech Republic, that sells local and organic food. In the NetBeans e-commerce tutorial, your task as a web developer is to create an e-commerce website for the Affable Bean, where customers can select the food they want and pay for it online. The store will then deliver the food to their door. This is what the homepage of the Affable Bean website looks like when it's finished. Let's take a look at a demo of how the website is supposed to work. Here we are on the Affable Bean website. We've got categories for dairy, meats, bakery, and fruits and vegetables. We've got a cart with no items in it, and we can view the pages in English or Czech. So let's choose a category. We'll go to dairy, and we will add some milk to our cart. And now we will change the category. Let's go to bakery, and we'll add a pumpkin seed bun to our cart. And you can see that the cart is being updated. We now have 2 items in our cart. We now have a button where we can view the cart, and we also have a button where we can proceed to checkout. So let's just add one more item to our cart. We'll add some sausages, and now we'll go ahead and view that cart. All right, so our shopping cart contains 3 items. We can clear the cart, we can continue shopping, or we can proceed to checkout. We've got a subtotal here, and we've got each item with the price and the quantity. So I'm going to go ahead and change the quantity of one of my items here. I want 2 liters of milk instead of just 1. I'm going to update that, and you can see that it updates the number of items in the cart, and it updates the subtotal. So now I'm going to proceed to checkout, and I'm going to fill out this little checkout form. Okay, customer information form. So let's put Franz Kafka as our name, and we'll have an email address of let's see, how about vermin@books dot CZ, phone number. I think that will pass as a legitimate phone number. Address, we'll just say courthouse. Prague, we'll use District 1. And for credit card number, we'll put something I know will work. Submit the purchase. And it gives us a confirmation page. The cart has been cleared. There are no items in the current cart. We've got an order summary. We've got the delivery address over there. And we've got a little button that can take us back to shopping. And that's it. Now let's take a look at the overall architecture of the Affable Bean project, and we'll talk about how simple Affable Bean differs from that. Like most e-commerce websites, the architecture of the Affable Bean site is based on the Model View Controller, or MVC pattern. The client looks at web pages using a web browser. Web pages from the site are dynamically generated using JSP technology. JSP pages are part of the view component of the MVC pattern. When the client clicks a link or submits a form, that action sends a request to the application. The request is handled by a controller servlet, and as its name implies, the controller servlet is part of the controller component of the MVC pattern. All of the business logic in the application and all classes associated with managing the data in the application are part of the model component of the MVC pattern. The NetBeans e-commerce tutorial uses entity classes to model the data stored in the database, and it uses session beans to model database operations. Entity classes use the Java Persistence API, or JPA, and session beans are a kind of enterprise Java bean, or EJB. JPA and EJB are Java technologies that can make it easier to construct the Java classes that model portions of the database. Through the use of annotations, they take care of a lot of different tasks for you, like security, transactions, pooling, and thread safety. To utilize EJB technology, you need to have access to an EJB container. The NetBeans e-commerce tutorial uses the Glassfish application server as its EJB container. How does simple Affable Bean differ from Affable Bean? Well, first of all, let me remind you one more time about where they do not differ. Both the appearance of the simple Affable Bean website and the functionality of the simple Affable Bean website are largely unchanged from the original Affable Bean website. There are some minor differences, but you probably wouldn't be able to detect them from just casually browsing each site. The differences are in the implementation, and the most significant difference is that simple Affable Bean does not use EJB technologies. This means that in the model component of the MVC pattern, simple Affable Bean does not use session beans, nor does it use entity classes. Session beans and entity classes rely on EJB and JPA, and something we haven't mentioned yet, dependency injection. Instead, the simple Affable Bean code uses similar classes with similar functionality, but it develops them and implements them from scratch as plain old Java objects. And it does that by making use of a design pattern called the Data Access Object Pattern, or DAO pattern. In the DAO pattern, model classes are used to model data from the database. and DAO classes are used to model database operations. So why the decision to forego EJB technologies? As we've mentioned before, using EJB can actually allow you to get more functionality while doing less coding. And by the way, this isn't only true of EJB. It's true of web development frameworks in general, like Spring, Struts, Hibernate, and the list goes on. So there are certainly benefits to using frameworks, but there are also benefits in avoiding them. Using EJB means that your server must have an EJB container like Glassfish or Firefly. If you don't use EJB, a lightweight application server like Tomcat is all you need. Using a framework can result in code that is difficult to reason about unless all the developers on your team are experts in that particular framework. Debugging code that depends on functionality that is provided by the framework can be much more challenging than debugging straight Java code. Also, using EJB or any other framework means you have less flexibility when you want to modify your code. If your business requirements change, you will have to find ways to modify your code that are consistent with the constraints of your framework. Finally, from a learning point of view, avoiding high-level frameworks is beneficial because the resulting code demonstrates the basic building blocks of web application development rather than the specifics of a particular framework. Another difference between Simple Affable Bean and the original Affable Bean project is that Affable Bean uses a single controller servlet to manage all of its user input. Not only does the Simple Affable Bean code use a separate controller servlet for each page on the site, but each controller servlet delegates most of the processing logic to a helper class called a view model. The view model for a web page updates any data that needs to be changed in the model and gathers together in one location all the data needed by the JSP page. Effectively, the controller servlet captures the request, asks the appropriate view model to process the information, and then forwards the request to the appropriate JSP page. Most of the hard work is done by the view model. This is called the model view model pattern. It's still essentially an MVC pattern, but with an added separation of concerns between directing the request and processing the necessary information. And those are the major differences between the original Affable Bean application and the Simple Affable Bean. There are many more changes in the Simple Affable Bean code, and this page gives an incomplete summary of them. Simple Affable Bean uses the Gradle build tool to import needed libraries and build the project. Because of this, you can build the project from the command line or just use your favorite IDE. As previously mentioned, EJB technologies are not used in Simple Affable Bean. DAO classes directly access the database using SQL commands. Because no EJB container is required, Tomcat is the application server we recommend using with Simple Affable Bean. Each page has a separate controller servlet. In the original Affable Bean project, there was only a single controller class. In addition, controller servlets in Simple Affable Bean delegate processing and storing of Java objects to viewModel objects. The post redirect get pattern is used so that when clients hit the reload button after submitting a form, they don't receive an error. Simple Affable Bean has many other additions as well. Validation of forms is moved to the business layer. A central error servlet handles all error processing. The application allows logging of error messages. Caching is used for model objects, and a testing framework is available for basic acceptance testing. For more information on Simple Affable Bean, visit the website at simpleaffablebean.info and take a look at the other videos in this sequence.